In the fall of 1993, the town of Berkeley, California, was alive with the fever of high school football. Friday nights meant packed stands at Berkeley High School Stadium, where chants echoed and brass bands played under the floodlights. Among the crowd's roar, one name was shouted louder than any other: Ryan Keller. At 17, Ryan wasn't just another quarterback. He was a rising star, the kind of athlete recruiters whispered about even when he wasn't in the room. Coaches believed he had the arm to change games, and scouts from universities across the West Coast were beginning to circle. For his classmates, he was the boy destined to escape the small-town struggles of the East Bay and carve out a future under brighter lights. Ryan carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the town's hopes rested on his shoulders. Tall, broad-shouldered, with shaggy brown hair that stuck out from under his helmet, he had the kind of smile that made teachers forgive late homework and parents proud to say their kids were his friends. But it wasn't just his game that set him apart. It was his trademark black and gold cleats, worn in every match, scuffed from the turf, and laced with the same ritual before every practice. To his teammates, those cleats were lucky. To Ryan, they were a symbol. No matter how far he might go, he was still a kid from Berkeley. That October evening, practice had run later than usual. The air smelled of eucalyptus from the nearby groves, and the field lights flickered before cutting out, plunging the stadium into early autumn darkness. Teammates trickled away in groups, their voices fading into the night. Ryan lingered behind, stuffing his gear into a duffel bag, his cleats still on his feet. As he walked toward the exit, he passed the chain-link fence and turned to wave at a younger teammate. His last words to anyone that night would later haunt his family: "I'll be home after practice." At 9:15 p.m., Ryan left the stadium. He was never seen again. When Ryan's parents woke the next morning, the silence in the house was jarring. His bed was unslept in, his duffel missing. At first, they assumed he had stayed over at a friend's house. But by mid-morning, worry crept in. His mother began calling classmates. No one had seen him since practice. His father drove to the school, pacing the field, checking the parking lot. Nothing. By afternoon, police were notified. Officers canvassed the area around Alston Way and San Pablo Avenue, retracing the route Ryan would normally take home. Witnesses recalled seeing a dark pickup truck idling near the school that night, its engine running, headlights off. No one could agree on the color: black, dark green. But one thing was certain: it didn't belong to any of the students. The weight of panic pressed down on the town. Teachers wept in classrooms. Football practice was canceled indefinitely. At UC Berkeley's Memorial Glade, students lit candles and held a vigil, hoping Ryan would walk into the circle of light. His younger sister clutched his yearbook photo, whispering that he'd promised to take her to her first college game. The Keller household became command central for grief. Detectives came and went, shuffling papers, asking the same questions. Had Ryan ever mentioned wanting to leave? Had he fought with anyone recently? Was there a girlfriend, someone he was meeting that night? His parents could only shake their heads. Ryan had been excited about the season, about scouts from Stanford University who were rumored to be coming to the next game. He wasn't a boy running away from life. He was running toward it. By the second day, Berkeley was no longer simply a college town. It was the epicenter of a nightmare. Police cruisers circled the streets, reporters crowded outside the high school gates, and parents pulled their children tighter, whispering that if a boy like Ryan could vanish, then no one was safe. The Berkeley Police Department organized search efforts almost immediately. Volunteers lined up outside the station, many of them Ryan's classmates, some still wearing their jerseys from practice. Coaches who had once barked at Ryan to run faster now stood in stunned silence as they handed out flyers. The missing poster showed Ryan smiling in his black and gold uniform, helmet tucked under his arm, the words, "Missing, Ryan Keller, age 17, stamped above the photo. The community combed the streets. They scoured Shattuck Avenue, wandered into the groves at Tilden Regional Park, and searched the dim edges of the Berkeley Marina. The school stadium, usually lit up on Fridays, now sat in darkness, surrounded by parents holding candles instead of pom-poms. Each passing hour chipped away at hope, yet no one dared say aloud what they were all beginning to fear. Then, a discovery jolted the investigation. 2 days into the search, a group of students helping on campus stumbled across Ryan's duffel bag near Memorial Glade at UC Berkeley. The bag, soaked from a night of rain, sat slumped against the grass, its zipper half open. Inside were his shoulder pads, a change of clothes, and a pair of socks still rolled together. But the black and gold cleats were missing. Detectives pounced on the evidence. How had the bag gotten there? Memorial Glade was only a short walk from the high school, but Ryan had no reason to be on UC Berkeley's campus that late at night. Theories sprang up instantly. Had Ryan met someone there? Was he lured, or did he drop the bag while running from someone? The discovery did nothing to calm the community. Instead, it fueled darker questions. Rumors swept through the hallways of Berkeley High. Some classmates whispered that Ryan had been under too much pressure, that maybe he had run away to escape expectations. Others said a rival player from Oakland Tech had threatened him after a heated game weeks earlier, and this was payback. Still others claimed they'd heard Ryan was secretly seeing someone he wasn't supposed to, and maybe that had caught up to him. The police, too, followed every lead. Witness canvassing turned up a chilling piece of information. Several residents along San Pablo Avenue, just blocks from the stadium, recalled seeing a dark pickup truck idling by the curb the night Ryan disappeared. The vehicle's headlights were off, its engine running. Some said it was black, others insisted it was dark green, but all agreed it was unfamiliar. Detectives treated the truck as a serious lead. They interviewed auto shops, checked DMV records, and stopped passing pickups on the chance it matched the vague description. But the search yielded nothing. The mysterious truck seemed to vanish as suddenly as Ryan himself. As suspicion spread, the investigation began to look inward, at Ryan's own team. Police called in players for questioning, one by one. The locker room, once filled with easy laughter, now reeked of tension. Teammates shifted uneasily under fluorescent lights as detectives asked where they had been that night. Some players insisted Ryan left the field alone. Others claimed they saw him near the gym, talking to someone whose face they couldn't see. A few admitted they weren't sure, they had been joking around, distracted, and by the time they looked for Ryan, he was gone. But it was the inconsistencies that troubled detectives most. Stories overlapped but didn't quite match. Small details contradicted each other. Who had seen Ryan last? At what time? Why did some accounts place him walking toward the parking lot, while others said he never left the gym? The strain on the team was immediate. Parents pulled their sons aside, urging them to tell the truth. Coaches grew restless, torn between loyalty to their players and the gnawing suspicion that one of them knew more than he was admitting. The team's season, once headed toward the playoffs, collapsed under the weight of suspicion and grief. Through it all, Ryan's parents clung to hope. They sat through every police briefing, desperate for a lead, desperate for an answer. His mother replayed his last words in her mind, "I'll be home after practice," as though saying them over and over might pull him back. His father paced the living room at night, convinced that somewhere, somehow, his son was still alive. But the investigation was about to take a darker turn. Late one evening, detectives were approached by a janitor who worked the late shift at Berkeley High. He was an older man, quiet, the kind who knew every creak in the school's hallways. Nervous, he told police something he had kept to himself for days, unsure if anyone would believe him. On the night Ryan disappeared, well past midnight, the janitor had been sweeping near the gymnasium. The school was empty, its corridors echoing with the hum of vending machines. Then, from inside the gym, he heard it, banging sounds. At first, he thought it was the wind rattling a door. But the banging came again, louder this time, like fists pounding against metal. He froze, listening. The sound was frantic, desperate. For nearly a minute, it went on. Then it stopped. Silence swallowed the building. The janitor swore he checked the gym doors afterward. They were locked tight. He convinced himself it was nothing, maybe even his imagination, until the news of Ryan's disappearance spread. Then the memory clawed at him. What if it had been Ryan, trapped inside, crying for help? Detectives moved swiftly, searching the gym from top to bottom. They checked the bleachers, the locker rooms, the storage closets. Every door, every latch, every shadowed corner was inspected. But the gym was spotless, empty, without a single sign of struggle. It was as though the noise had never happened. And yet the janitor's words hung in the air like a ghost. The days turned into weeks, and Ryan Keller's disappearance spread like wildfire beyond Berkeley. What had once been a local tragedy now spilled into headlines across the Bay Area. Newspapers framed him as the golden boy gone missing, a star quarterback with a promising future, swallowed by mystery. News crews camped outside Berkeley High School, capturing the tear-streaked faces of classmates holding vigils and the weary determination etched into the lines of his parents' faces. But with media came pressure. Pressure on the police to deliver answers. Pressure on the school to defend its safety. And pressure on a community already teetering on the edge of panic. The search widened. Helicopters swept over Tilden Park, their spotlights cutting through thick fog that rolled down from the hills. Boats scoured the waters near the Berkeley Marina, engines humming as volunteers leaned over rails with flashlights, scanning the surface. Each effort ended the same. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a single lead that explained where Ryan had gone. And so, suspicion began to bloom, dark and uncontrollable. Some pointed fingers at rival schools, especially Oakland Tech High, Berkeley's fiercest football rival. Their matchups were the stuff of local legend, brutal contests that drew half the city to the stands. Ryan had humiliated them the previous fall, throwing a game-winning touchdown in the final seconds. Whispers spread. Had resentment festered into something far worse? Could a rival player, or even a parent, have sought revenge? Others looked closer to home. Rumors emerged about Ryan's coaches. Some claimed he had been under immense pressure to secure a scholarship, that arguments with staff had grown heated in the weeks before his disappearance. Theories swirled. Had a coach pushed him too far? Was there something darker at play within the locker room that no one dared admit? For Ryan's family, these rumors cut deep. His parents begged the public not to speculate, insisting their son's disappearance was not a game or scandal but a nightmare no family should endure. But rumors, once set loose, rarely die. They thrived in the shadows, filling the void left by the absence of answers. Then came a development that twisted the story even further. Ryan's girlfriend, Emily Torres, a fellow student at Berkeley High, agreed to speak with police. Pale and visibly shaken, she admitted something she had never told anyone. In the week before he vanished, Ryan had confided in her that he was nervous about something big. When detectives pressed her, Emily said Ryan didn't give details. He only hinted that he had been approached by someone who promised him an opportunity, but one that left him uneasy. She recalled the way he twisted his bracelet when he spoke, a habit he had when hiding something. He said it could change everything, Emily whispered, but he wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. Detectives latched onto her testimony. What could Ryan have been offered? A scholarship deal? Money? Or something more sinister? Digging deeper into his personal life, investigators uncovered the double-edged reality of Ryan Keller's success. On one hand, he was being scouted by Stanford University, a dream come true, the kind of opportunity most high school athletes only fantasize about. Recruiters had been in the stands, quietly evaluating him during the season. Letters had even begun to arrive, hinting at the possibility of a full scholarship. But success breeds envy. Some of Ryan's teammates struggled in his shadow. Classmates resented the special treatment he often received. Teachers admitted he occasionally flaunted his talent, brushing off assignments with a smirk that only widened when a touchdown on Friday night made everyone forget his missing homework. For every admirer, there was someone who rolled their eyes, muttering that Ryan Keller thought he was untouchable. The investigation turned up a few unsettling names. Boys who had once been Ryan's friends but had drifted away, their resentment quietly hardening over the years. One had recently been suspended for fighting in the parking lot after practice. Another had failed to make varsity, blaming Ryan for hogging the spotlight. Police interviewed them all, but nothing definitive emerged. Still, the sense that someone in Ryan's orbit might have wished him harm only deepened the mystery. Just as hope began to flicker, a chilling clue surfaced. A patrol officer assigned to the waterfront reported something odd near the Bay Bridge Pier. There, in the damp sand not far from the water's edge, they found a footprint, pressed deep, preserved by the night's mist. Investigators rushed to the scene, roping off the area as forensic teams crouched over the ground. The print was unmistakable. The pattern matched the soles of Ryan Keller's black and gold cleats. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. If the footprint belonged to Ryan, it meant he had been near the pier the night he vanished. But why? The Bay Bridge was miles from Berkeley High. He would have had to cross through Oakland or be taken there deliberately. The location raised terrifying questions. Had Ryan been lured there by whoever made him nervous? Had he run there, fleeing from someone in the dark? Or was he dragged, fighting for his life, his cleats skidding against the sand in a final, desperate mark? Detectives studied the scene obsessively. Yet there was nothing else. No fingerprints, no clothing, no signs of a struggle. The tide had erased everything but the single footprint, as though the bay itself had swallowed the rest of the story. Theories spun out of control. Some believed Ryan had been abducted, taken from the pier onto a boat, vanishing into the waters below. Others feared he had been murdered and his body disposed of, lost to the currents that surged under the bridge. But with no witnesses, no body, and no additional evidence, the discovery raised more questions than it answered. The media splashed the story across front pages. Ryan Keller's footprint found at Bay Bridge. Candlelight vigils turned somber, the hope in the crowd dimming to resignation. Ryan's parents stood at the pier days later, staring at the waves, begging anyone with information to come forward. Still, silence answered them. And so the case reached another agonizing standstill. By 1998, 5 years after Ryan Keller's disappearance, the investigation had withered to embers. The police files, once thick with reports, witness interviews, and frantic updates, were now stacked neatly in a box labeled Cold Case. No arrests. No confessions. No answers. Ryan's family was left stranded in limbo. His bedroom in their modest Berkeley home on Oregon Street became a shrine. His football posters still clung to the walls, edges curling with age. The bedspread, a bold mix of black and gold, was smoothed daily by his mother as though he might walk in at any moment and flop onto it after practice. His father polished Ryan's trophies, lining them carefully along the shelf, dusting away the years while the silence in the room grew louder. For the town of Berkeley, Ryan's absence lingered like a wound that refused to heal. Each year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, candlelight vigils gathered at the Berkeley Marina, where dozens of small flames danced against the wind. Old teammates would show up, heads bowed, shoulders hunched, their adult faces hardened by time but softened by the memory of the boy they'd once called their leader. Classmates who had grown older, who had gone on to college, jobs, marriages, stood in clusters, whispering about how Ryan would have been 20, then 25, then 30, always imagining, never knowing. But unity eventually gave way to fractures. Some blamed the Berkeley Police Department, accusing them of botching the case. They didn't search hard enough, one angry neighbor told the San Francisco Chronicle in 1999. Others whispered darker suspicions, that Ryan's own teammates knew more than they had admitted. Had jealousy turned into violence? Had locker room rivalry boiled over in a way the police never uncovered? Theories spread like wildfire in diners and living rooms across the East Bay. Parents pointed to the janitor's late-night story of hearing banging in the gym, arguing it had never been fully investigated. Others claimed the footprint near the Bay Bridge Pier was too clean, too convenient, perhaps planted to distract from the real story. And always, Ryan's name resurfaced. His ghost haunted Friday night games at Edwards Stadium, where the new crop of players ran across the same field he once dominated. The announcers stopped mentioning him after a few years, but in the stands, older fans still muttered, "Ryan would have taken us to state." Then, in 2001, a shock rippled through the community. Coach Tom Barlow, the man who had led Ryan's team during those fateful years, abruptly resigned from his position and left town. He had always been a polarizing figure, praised for his strict discipline, criticized for pushing players past their breaking point. When asked about his departure, the school gave a bland statement about personal reasons. But for a town still clinging to a mystery, the timing was suspicious. Why leave, after years of insisting he wanted to see Berkeley's football program rise again? Whispers grew. Some claimed Coach Barlow had been hiding something about the night Ryan vanished. Others suggested the guilt had finally driven him out. His sudden departure only added fuel to a fire that never truly went out. By the mid-2000s, media coverage of Ryan Keller's disappearance had nearly faded. New tragedies captured the headlines. New missing persons cases consumed the spotlight. But not for Ryan's parents. His mother, Margaret, continued writing letters to newspapers, begging them to revisit the story. His father, Daniel, filed request after request for updates from the police, pressing detectives who now only shrugged, admitting the trail was colder than ever. For the Keller family, time was not a healer. It was a thief, stealing hope day by day. Then came the year 2010. It was a warm autumn afternoon when a hiker walking along the trails of Tilden Regional Park, just north of Berkeley, spotted something odd in the dirt. Tilden was sprawling. Over 2,000 acres of wooded trails, creeks, and grassy ridges overlooking the bay. It was the kind of place that could hide secrets for decades. The hiker, stooping to tie his boot, noticed frayed shoelaces half buried in the soil, tangled in roots just off the path. They were grimy, stiff with time, but what made him freeze was the color, faded black and gold. The hiker called the authorities. Within hours, the discovery made headlines. Possible evidence in Ryan Keller case found at Tilden Park. Forensic teams descended on the area, combing the trail with metal detectors and dogs, scouring every inch for more. The shoelaces were carefully bagged, sealed, and rushed to the lab. The question hung heavy over the community. Were these Ryan's cleat laces, the very ones he was last seen wearing in 1993? Ryan's parents watched the news with trembling hands. After 17 years, could this finally be the break they had begged for? Could the forest have been keeping it secret all this time? Days stretched into weeks as DNA testing began. The shoelaces were tested for traces of Ryan's genetic material, skin cells, sweat, anything that might prove they had once belonged to him. The results were crushing. The DNA was inconclusive. Too much time had passed. Weather and soil had degraded whatever evidence might have once existed. The tests could not confirm nor deny whether the laces had been Ryan's. The discovery, instead of bringing clarity, only deepened the torment. If they were his, how did they end up in the remote trails of Tilden Park, nearly 6 miles from the last confirmed sighting of Ryan near the Bay Bridge Pier? And if they weren't his, then why had they appeared in Berkeley's most expansive park, carrying the very colors that defined his legacy? Theories exploded once again. Some argued Ryan had been brought to the park, perhaps held there before being moved elsewhere. Others thought the laces had been planted, a cruel trick by someone who enjoyed tormenting a grieving community. The Keller family returned to the park that year, walking the trail with quiet steps, scanning every branch and stone as though Ryan might still be there, waiting. His mother tied a ribbon to a nearby tree, whispering a prayer into the wind. The press swarmed the story for a few weeks, interviewing detectives, hikers, and experts. But when no further evidence turned up, interest began to fade once again. For the public, it became another strange footnote in a case already drowning in them. For the Kellers, It was another wound. Another, almost. Another reminder that Ryan's story remained untold. As the years pressed on, one fact became undeniable. Someone, somewhere, knew the truth. And with the Tilden Park shoelaces raising more questions than answers, detectives faced a haunting reality. After nearly 2 decades, Ryan Keller's fate remained as mysterious, as painful, and as elusive as the night he vanished. By 2023, Ryan Keller's case had become a tragic ghost story whispered more than told. 3 decades had passed since the star athlete vanished on that September night in 1993. For many in Berkeley, the mystery had receded into memory, something remembered only at alumni gatherings or by those who drove past his old missing person posters, still tacked up and yellowed in forgotten corners of town. But for Ryan's parents, Margaret and Daniel Keller, the years had not dulled the wound. They still attended vigils, still spoke his name in the present tense, and still kept his room intact, as if he might return tomorrow. And then fate, or something darker, forced the story back into the light. It began innocently, almost mundanely. In the spring of 2023, Berkeley High School underwent renovations on its aging gymnasium. The building, erected in the mid-20th century, had been patched and repainted countless times but was finally slated for a major overhaul. Contractors stripped the gym bare, tearing down old bleachers, exposing pipes, and prying open rows of dented, rusting lockers that had not been used in decades. Most were filled with the detritus of teenagers long gone, crumpled notes, abandoned sneakers, ancient soda cans. But one locker, wedged into a corner, sealed shut with a thick crust of paint and years of neglect, proved different. Workers had to crowbar it open, the metal shrieking as rusted hinges gave way. What they found inside made them stop cold. Dust spilled out first, along with cobwebs that hung like gray curtains. The air carried the musty smell of something trapped and forgotten. At the bottom of the locker sat a pair of cleats, black and gold, dulled by time but unmistakably athletic. Their laces were knotted, stiff, and caked with dried dirt that had hardened into a crust. The crew didn't know what to make of it. To them, it was just another relic of the past. But one worker, a lifelong Berkeley resident, recognized the colors immediately. "Those look like Keller's cleats," he muttered, half to himself. Within hours, the school administration contacted the police. The evidence was rushed to the crime lab, and for the first time in 30 years, investigators felt the spark of possibility. When forensic teams swabbed the laces, they found something extraordinary. Trace DNA embedded deep in the fibers, preserved just enough to test with modern technology. The results came back days later. It was Ryan. The DNA matched perfectly to samples long kept on file from his childhood belongings. After decades of inconclusive leads and false hopes, here was something undeniable. Ryan Keller's cleats had been sealed inside a Berkeley High locker all along. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Reporters who hadn't touched the case in years suddenly filled the airwaves with headlines. Cleats of missing Berkeley athlete found in locker during renovation. Cold case breakthrough. Keller mystery reopened after 30 years. The discovery was both electrifying and deeply unsettling. If the cleats were in the locker, who put them there? And why had they been hidden away for so long? The answer, or at least the first thread of it, came from the locker's number. Records traced the locker back to coach Tom Barlow, the same man who had abruptly resigned and left town in 2001, vanishing almost as cleanly as Ryan had years earlier. School logs showed the locker had once been his designated space during his tenure at Berkeley High. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. Detectives pored over Barlow's history again. His strict discipline, his sudden departure, the years of speculation that he had known more than he ever said. And now, this, Ryan's cleats, sealed in his locker, dirt still clinging to them as if frozen in time. Theories multiplied overnight. Had Coach Barlow hidden the evidence to protect someone else? Or had he himself been involved in Ryan's disappearance? Why would a respected educator and coach risk everything to conceal such damning items? Yet the mystery deepened further when detectives examined the cleats more closely. Stuffed deep inside the right shoe was something unexpected: a folded matchbook. Its paper was brittle, yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. The front bore the logo of a long-closed Oakland bar known as the Rusted Anchor, a dimly lit dive off San Pablo Avenue notorious in the 1990s for its rough clientele and whispered criminal connections. The detail sent shivers through investigators. Why would Ryan's cleat contain a matchbook from a seedy Oakland bar? Was it planted there? Or had Ryan himself been taken to the Rusted Anchor the night he disappeared? The matchbook was not just a clue, it was a breadcrumb, pointing toward a dark path long buried beneath decades of silence. When word of the matchbook reached the media, the city erupted with speculation. Some insisted Ryan must have been lured or taken to Oakland that night, perhaps by someone he trusted. Others argued the matchbook was deliberately placed in the cleat to send investigators down the wrong trail. And always, the question returned to Barlow: what did the coach know, and why had he vanished? For Ryan's parents, the discovery was both a knife and a lifeline. Margaret wept when she heard her son's DNA had been confirmed. It was proof at last that his story wasn't over. But it was also proof that he had been closer than anyone imagined, hidden in the very school where his name had once been cheered. Detectives now faced a labyrinth of contradictions. The cleats were real. The DNA was real. The connection to Barlow undeniable. But the matchbook was a whisper from the past, hinting that Ryan's disappearance was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than anyone had dared to believe. And with the Rusted Anchor long shuttered, the people who once haunted its dim corners were scattered like ashes. Some had died. Others had disappeared. But a few, just a few, still lived in Oakland's shadows. The discovery of Ryan Keller's cleats in 2023 had electrified Berkeley, but it also ignited something much larger: a new investigation. For 30 years, his disappearance had lingered as an open wound, patched over by speculation and unanswered questions. Now, with tangible evidence tying Ryan to Coach Tom Barlow's locker, detectives had no choice but to reopen the case. This time, they vowed, there would be no stone left unturned. The Berkeley Police Department assembled a special task force. Detectives who had once been rookies in the 1990s now found themselves seasoned veterans, hardened by decades of experience, but still haunted by the memory of Ryan's poster tacked up in every precinct. They brought in fresh eyes, young investigators unburdened by the mistakes of the original probe. Within days, the case file ballooned again, boxes of old evidence mingling with brand new leads. The FBI offered their resources, citing potential interstate connections. Ryan's story had crossed a threshold from a local tragedy to something that reeked of a wider, darker pattern. The first step was to re-interview everyone who had once been part of Ryan's orbit. His former teammates, now grown men in their 40s, were summoned. Some arrived reluctantly, others almost relieved to finally unburden themselves of secrets they had carried for decades. Under questioning, a troubling theme emerged. Ryan had not seemed himself in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Many confessed that things had not been as perfect as they once seemed on the field. Beneath Ryan's golden boy image as Berkeley High's star quarterback, tensions brewed. Some players had resented his effortless popularity, his charm with the crowds, his recruitment letters from Stanford. One former linebacker even admitted, there was jealousy, sure. He got the spotlight, while the rest of us busted our backs for scraps of attention. One former defensive back sighed deeply when asked about the old days. Look, I'll be honest with you. Ryan wasn't hated by everyone, but yeah, he rubbed people the wrong way. Some guys felt invisible around him. There were fights, arguments in the locker room. But we all thought it was just high school drama. Nothing serious enough to lead to what happened. The interviews painted a picture of a boy admired and envied in equal measure. But detectives knew envy could rot into something darker. The first real break came from someone who hadn't even been part of the original circle. Late one evening, a young man nervously walked into the Oakland Police Department. His hands shook as he clutched his phone. He said he had just come from a bar in Berkeley, a popular one called the Kingfish. There, he explained, he had overheard a drunk older man speaking far too loudly about Ryan Keller. The man, clearly intoxicated, had been telling his table how much he had hated Ryan back in high school, how he couldn't stand the perfect quarterback act. The young man had been so disturbed that he recorded part of the conversation on his phone. In the shaky recording, a rough, slurred voice could be heard saying, "Ryan Keller. God, I hated that kid. He thought he was untouchable. 30 years later, and I still remember that smug face. Nobody ever knew what he was really like. Star quarterback my ass." The word sent a chill through the detectives who listened. The FBI was called in immediately. If this man truly had been Ryan's classmate and carried such lingering hatred, he might hold answers, or worse, he might have been directly involved. The next day, FBI agents went to the Kingfish. The bar, with its wooden floors and worn booths, was a local favorite. When the agents discreetly described the man from the recording, the staff instantly recognized him. "Oh, that's Eric Doyle," one bartender said without hesitation. "He comes in a lot, especially on weekends. Sits in the corner, orders beers back to back, talks about the old days, sometimes gets real bitter. He definitely went to Berkeley High." The FBI knew they had their suspect. Friday night, agents staked out the bar. Customers trickled in, laughter spilling onto the street, but Doyle never appeared. The agents left empty-handed, the frustration thick in the air. But they didn't have to wait long. On Saturday, Doyle showed up. He walked in like a man who owned the place, nodding to the bartender, ordering his usual 2 cold beers. He hadn't even lifted the first bottle before the agents moved. They didn't storm him, didn't rough him up. After all, he was only a suspect. Instead, they surrounded his table quietly, their presence undeniable. Conversations in the bar fell silent as Doyle looked up, confused. "Eric Doyle?" one agent asked. He blinked, his mouth tightening. "Yeah, that's me. What's this about?" Within seconds, he was led outside, not in chains but under the firm escort of men who left no room for argument. Curious onlookers pressed their faces to the windows, whispering. Doyle didn't resist, but his swagger was gone. His eyes darted nervously, his hands twitching at his sides. At the station, Doyle was placed in an interview room. At first, he denied everything. He didn't know Ryan Keller, he said. He barely remembered high school. And no, he had nothing to do with any disappearance. But then detectives pulled out the recording. They pressed play. His own voice filled the room, spilling drunken hatred into the air. "Ryan Keller. God, I hated that kid." Doyle's face drained of color. His jaw clenched. He tried to speak, but his words faltered. Sweat formed along his temples, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. The guilt wasn't spoken, it was written across his face. For 30 years, Ryan Keller's name had been tied to silence. Now, with Doyle squirming under the weight of his own words, detectives sensed that the silence was about to break. But the question lingered, sharp and unresolved. Was Doyle merely a bitter old teammate with too much beer in his system, or had he been holding on to secrets about Ryan's disappearance all this time? The reopening of the case was no longer just about one boy who vanished. It was about the tangled web of envy, resentment, and silence that had allowed a predator to hide for decades. And Doyle, whether willing or not, was about to become the thread that unraveled it all. The walls of the interrogation room pressed in with an almost suffocating silence. Eric Doyle sat rigid in the metal chair, sweat beading across his brow despite the cold hum of the air conditioner. 4 hours, he had denied any involvement in Ryan Keller's disappearance, shifting blame toward Coach Barlow, toward anyone but himself. But denial had a way of corroding under the weight of truth, and when the agents replayed the recording of his drunken confession from the bar, Doyle's mask began to crumble. His eyes darted nervously, his lips trembling as though words begged to be released, but fear kept them caged. At last, he broke. His voice was hoarse, low at first, but steady enough to send chills down the spines of those listening. "It wasn't just me," Doyle whispered, staring at the table as if he could see the past etched into its steel surface. "There were 6 of us, all bench warmers. We weren't the Golden Boys. We weren't Ryan Keller." The lead FBI agent leaned forward, pen poised. "Who were the others?" Doyle hesitated. Naming them was like reopening a wound that had festered for decades. But there was no hiding anymore. Tommy Greer, Mark Ellis, Jordan Price, Kyle Bennett, and Sean Walker. All of us sat the bench. All of us watched Ryan shine while we drowned in shadows. We hated him for it. We wanted him to feel what it was like to be powerless. The bitterness in his tone was unmistakable. Ryan was the star. He had everything: the scouts watching him, the girls chasing him, the teachers praising him. And us, we were shadows, invisible, forgotten. Every game we sat there while he soaked up the light, while we drowned in resentment. Doyle's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. We just wanted to teach him a lesson. That's all. To make him feel fear for once. To knock him down from the pedestal he didn't even know he stood on. The lead FBI agent leaned forward, his voice sharp. "What do you mean by teach him a lesson? What exactly did you do?" Doyle's breathing quickened. He rubbed his palms together, as though trying to wash away the memory. We paid some boys. A gang. Notorious around town. The kind everyone stayed away from. We thought they'd do the dirty work. Grab Ryan, scare him, maybe rough him up a little. Nothing permanent. We thought we'd control it. His voice cracked. But you can't control men like that. You can't control violence once it's unleashed. The agents exchanged a glance, the room sinking into a heavier silence. One finally asked, "What happened to Ryan?" Doyle swallowed hard, his voice trembling now. "They killed him. Not on purpose. Not at first. At least, that's what we told ourselves. Maybe he fought back. Maybe he mouthed off. Maybe they just went too far. All I know is that the night ended with Ryan lying dead in the very place he was supposed to be alive. The gang panicked. They didn't stick around. They vanished from Berkeley like ghosts before dawn." He paused, his breathing ragged. "And you?" the agent pressed. Doyle shut his eyes, as if the images were too unbearable to face. "We found him. The 6 of us went to check on him in the secret place we'd arranged with the gang. We thought we'd find him tied up, maybe terrified, maybe ready to beg. But instead, he was just there. Cold. Lifeless. His body sprawled on the ground like the game was over before it even began. The room felt suffocating. The agents didn't interrupt. They wanted every drop of truth. "We panicked too," Doyle continued, his voice nearly a whisper now. "We couldn't call the cops. We couldn't admit what we'd done. We were kids, stupid kids who thought we were making a point. But standing over his body, we knew this wasn't a prank anymore. This was a crime. A murder." Tears welled in his eyes, though it was unclear whether they were for Ryan or for his own haunted soul. "So we buried him. Right there. We dug into the earth with our own hands, covered him up, and left him to the silence. We thought if we hid him well enough, nobody would ever know." The agents sat frozen, the gravity of the confession pressing down on the room. But Doyle wasn't finished. "We knew suspicion would come eventually. Someone would ask questions. And when that time came, we needed someone else to blame. So we planted his cleats in Coach Barlow's locker. He was strict, hard on us, always shouting, always demanding more. It wasn't hard to imagine people pointing the finger at him. We figured if the case ever resurfaced, All roads would lead to the coach. Doyle let out a hollow laugh, bitter and self-loathing. And it worked. For 30 years it worked. The whole city thought he was the monster. While we, 6 cowardly kids who grew into 6 cowardly men, lived our lives pretending Ryan Keller never existed. The room was silent again, the air thick with the horror of what Doyle had revealed. The agents didn't rush him. They didn't need to. The truth was unraveling itself piece by piece, and every word stained the floor like blood. Finally, Doyle looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide and haunted. The coach. He wasn't the bad guy. We were. We were the ones who hated Ryan enough to destroy him. And now, 30 years later, I can't outrun it anymore. None of us can. The agents scribbled notes, their faces grim. For decades, a community had cursed the name of a man who wasn't guilty, while the real culprits walked free, hiding in plain sight. The Cleats, once a symbol of Ryan's glory, had been twisted into a cruel diversion, a weapon to frame the innocent and protect the guilty. Doyle's confession didn't just clear Coach Barlow's name. It exposed the rotten envy that had festered among his own teammates, the ones who should have been his brothers. In the end, Ryan hadn't been destroyed by strangers. He had been betrayed by the very boys who shared his locker room, who wore the same jersey, who should have been his family. And as Doyle's voice trailed into silence, the reality settled like a cold weight. Ryan Keller's murder wasn't the act of one monster, but the cowardice of 6 boys whose jealousy had spiraled into an irreversible tragedy. Eric Doyle's confession opened a floodgate, but the FBI knew words weren't enough. They needed the others. Within hours, arrest warrants were issued, and a quiet operation began to dismantle the brotherhood of silence that had lasted more than 3 decades. The first to be taken was Tommy Greer. He lived 2 towns over, running a modest auto repair shop. Agents stormed the garage as he worked under a car lift. At first, Tommy laughed when they read him his rights, calling it a mistake. But when seated under the harsh light of the interrogation room, Doyle's signed statement laid before him, his bravado cracked. His eyes darted wildly, hands fidgeting. He blurted out half-truths, insisting, "It wasn't my idea. I just went along with it." His voice quivered, a man trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Within hours, he collapsed into tears, begging for leniency. Next was Mark Ellis, once the most outspoken of the group. Now he was a middle-aged man with a family and a respectable job as a school administrator. The FBI arrived at his home in the dead of night, his children watching from the staircase as their father was led away in handcuffs. In the interrogation room, Ellis tried to stonewall. He spoke calmly, almost arrogantly, insisting Doyle was lying to save himself. But when agents played the old recording, the drunk bar rant where Doyle had muttered names, Mark's composure shattered. His face drained of color, his hands trembled, and at last he muttered, "We never meant for him to die." It was as close to an admission as the agents needed. Jordan Price was harder to find. He'd left California years ago, drifting across states, eventually settling under a different name. When agents tracked him down in Arizona, Jordan tried to run. He fled his house through the back door, sprinting across dry earth before being tackled to the ground. In custody, his defiance continued. He cursed the agents, denied knowing Ryan, denied being on the team, denied even knowing Doyle. But the evidence was overwhelming. Old photos of him in his jersey, Doyle's testimony, and fingerprints matched from Ryan's belongings buried in evidence. When faced with the undeniable, Jordan went silent, staring at the wall for hours, refusing to speak another word. His silence was confession enough. Kyle Bennett was perhaps the most pitiful. When agents knocked on his apartment door, he broke down immediately, confessing before they even cuffed him. Years of guilt had eaten him alive: alcoholism, failed marriages, a string of dead-end jobs. In the interrogation room, he wept uncontrollably, hands shaking, head bowed. "I see him every night," he sobbed. "Ryan standing there, asking me why. I can't sleep. I can't live like this anymore. His confession poured out like poison finally released from the vein. Unlike the others, Kyle didn't try to fight. He welcomed the end, almost relieved to have the weight lifted from him. The last was Sean Walker, the quietest of them all back then, and just as quiet now. He lived alone, never married, working odd construction jobs. When arrested, he showed no resistance, almost as if he had been waiting for this day. In the interrogation room, he neither cried nor raged. He simply nodded when asked if Doyle's account was true. His words were few but chilling. "We buried him. I shoveled the dirt. I remember the sound. That's all I hear when I close my eyes. The dirt hitting him. I've been burying him every night since." His voice was flat, drained of life, as though his soul had been buried alongside Ryan decades ago. One by one, the 6 men were laid bare, not just as suspects, but as guilty conspirators who had traded a boy's life for their envy. When news of their arrest spread, Berkeley was plunged into shock. Parents who had once believed the boys were harmless benchwarmers realized the bitter truth. Jealousy had festered into cruelty, and cruelty had led to murder. Coach Barlow, once branded as a villain, stood quietly outside the courthouse when the men were arraigned. Reporters swarmed him, but all he said was, "Ryan deserved better. I always knew he did." The community wept, not only for Ryan Keller, whose bright future had been stolen, but for the years of suspicion, silence, and lies that had allowed the truth to rot beneath the surface. In the end, Doyle's words during interrogation rang the loudest. "Hate doesn't care about intentions. It eats everything until there's nothing left." And now, as the 6 former teammates faced justice, the world finally saw the truth. The real monsters had never been hiding in the shadows. They had been sitting on the bench all along. At the front sat Ryan's family, aged by grief yet unshaken. His mother held a small box in her lap, the same cleats Ryan had worn on the day he vanished. When the defendants were led into the courtroom, whispers rippled through the gallery. Once, these men were boys who had run plays on the same football field as Ryan, laughing in the same locker room. Now, shackled and hollow-eyed, they looked like shadows of the lives they had stolen. The prosecution wasted no time. Projecting Ryan's yearbook photo on the screen, they reminded the jury of the boy who had never been allowed to grow up. They laid out Doyle's confession, each word echoing like a hammer strike. 6 substitutes who envied the star quarterback, a deal with a local gang to teach him a lesson, and the horror that spiraled when that lesson became a death. But what seared the courtroom most was the detail of the burial. The prosecutor's voice broke as she read, "They buried him with their own hands, in the dark of night, and walked away as though he had never existed." When Kyle Bennett was called, the tension was unbearable. Shaking, he admitted the conspiracy. "We never thought it would go this far," he whispered. "But when I saw Ryan lying there, lifeless, I knew I'd helped destroy someone's whole world." His tears fell freely, and for a moment even the jury seemed torn between anger and pity. Tommy Greer, always the jittery one, crumbled under cross-examination. When asked if he had heard Ryan's last words, his face twisted in agony. He sobbed uncontrollably, unable to answer, and the courtroom sat frozen in silence. That silence carried more weight than any words could have. Mark Ellis, arrogant as ever, tried to distance himself, claiming it had all been a prank. The prosecutor's rebuttal sliced him down. "Pranks do not end in graves, Mr. Ellis. Pranks do not leave mothers without sons. What you did was no prank. It was murder." The line thundered across headlines the next morning. Jordan Price refused to testify, his cold, unflinching stare unsettling even the spectators. His silence became its own confession. Every unanswered question dug him deeper. Sean Walker, by contrast, spoke plainly. His words were flat, almost lifeless. "We buried him. That's all there is to it." The stark simplicity chilled the room. But the most shocking twist came when the defense tried to resurrect the old rumor. that Coach Barlow had been involved all along. Gasps erupted in the gallery. For years, suspicion had swirled around the man who had trained, guided, and protected Ryan. Some had whispered that he was too close, others that his temper hid something darker. But the prosecution was ready. The planted cleats were presented as evidence, the very pair now resting in Ryan's mother's lap. FBI forensic experts demonstrated that the shoes had been tampered with and placed in Barlow's locker by the defendants. The courtroom erupted once again, but this time in outrage at the deception. When Coach Barlow finally took the stand, the gallery fell silent. Age had weathered him, but his voice carried the same steady authority that once commanded a football field. Looking straight at the 6 defendants, he spoke slowly. For years, I bore suspicion that wasn't mine to carry. I was cast as a monster while the real monsters hid in plain sight. You stole Ryan's life. You stole my honor. You turned a whole town against me. But today the truth is free. And Ryan is free. His words hung in the air like a benediction, breaking whatever composure the defendants still clung to. Even Doyle lowered his head, no longer able to meet the coach's eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 48 hours. The verdicts were unanimous. Eric Doyle, guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Mark Ellis, guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Tommy Greer, guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Jordan Price, guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Sean Walker, guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Kyle Bennett, guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. When the sentences were read, sentenced to death by firing squad for 6 of them, the gallery erupted with sobs. Ryan's mother clutched his cleats to her chest and whispered, "Run free now, baby." For the first time in 30 years, her tears carried something close to relief. But the trial did more than convict 6 men. It tore open a wound that had festered in Berkeley for decades. Families of other missing children stepped forward, demanding their own cases be reopened. The community, once divided by suspicion, began the slow work of healing. And Coach Barlow, once disgraced, was embraced with open arms. The town erected a memorial outside the high school, a bronze statue of Ryan in his jersey, mid-stride, forever running. Still, as the final gavel fell and the courthouse emptied, a haunting question lingered. If 6 ordinary boys could conspire to bury a secret so deep, what other truths might still lie hidden in California's past? One locker had unraveled the mystery of a star's disappearance. But it had also opened the door to shadows no one had dared to face, until now.